This is a discussion about how the socially unacceptable behavior of several of my ancestors are the very reason I and my family actually exist today. We are all here today, not in spite of their misbehaving ways, but in fact because of their very misbehavior. I will start with my maternal grandfather, Joseph Kolasa. He was of Polish heritage, born in 1888 in the small town of Nowy Targ in southern Poland. At the time of his birth, Nowy Targ was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, so his nationality was actually Austrian, not Polish. Around the time Joseph was 20 years old, he was conscripted into the Austrian army as an infantryman. The required term of service in the Austrian army at that time was a minimum of 3 years. However, on his U.S. World War I draft card, Joseph listed his prior military service as 3 months as an infantryman in the Austrian army. So he obviously deserted and probably fled to Prussia, now Germany. This has been confirmed by a professional historian and genealogist in Poland and other historical records which show that at least 50% of the Polish men conscripted into the Austrian army deserted. In 1911, Joseph immigrated to the USA. 3 years later, in July 1914, World War I broke out with Russia attacking the Austro-Hungarian Empire on the Eastern Front. So if Joseph had not deserted and come to America in 1911, he very likely would have been killed fighting against the Russians on the Eastern Front during World War I. The Austrian army was known to send its Polish troops into the front lines as cannon fodder. So the fact that Joseph deserted is one of the very reasons I am able to tell you his story. I actually feel grateful that he deserted. I will return to the discussion about my grandfather Joseph's additional misbehaving ways in a few minutes. Next, I will turn to my paternal grandmother, Nellie Nolan, believed to be the young woman on the right in this photo. Nellie was born in 1890 in Brooklyn, New York City, to William Nolan and Ellen Kearns Nolan. William had immigrated from Ireland, while Ellen was born in Brooklyn in February 1867. Nellie was the youngest of William and Ellen's 4 children. Her older sister Katie is the woman on the left in this photo. More about Katie in a moment. In April 1894, Nellie was found wandering around unsupervised on the mean streets of Brooklyn. She was picked up by the Brooklyn Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, an early form of what we now call Child Protective Services, and sent to live at St. Malachi's Home for Children, a Catholic orphanage in Rockaway Park, Queens, where her older sister Katie was already living. So my ancestors' misbehaving actually extends back to my great-grandparents, William and Ellen Nolan, for neglecting and abandoning their children and letting them wander around unsupervised on the mean streets of Brooklyn while they were probably drunk. Records show that William and Ellen were known to be intemperate, meaning they were alcoholics. Nellie was released from St. Malachi's to her mother's custody sometime prior to 1900. It is unknown where Nellie's father was at the time. He is not listed in the 1900 census as living with Ellen and Nellie. The situation of Nellie living with her mother did not last long. In July 1903, Nellie was beaten by her mother, kicked out of the house because she refused to go get her mother more beer. Ellen then had Nellie arrested for juvenile vagrancy by the Brooklyn Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children and sent to live at the New York Catholic Protectory a juvenile detention facility located in the Bronx. Nellie lived at the Protectory until May 1907, when she was released to the custody of her older sister, Katie, and Katie's husband, Warren Anger, who were living in Brooklyn. Warren is perhaps the man on the far left in this photo. 2 months later, in July 1907, Nellie became pregnant for the first time with my dad's brother, Walter Nolan. Nellie was actually 17 years old at the time, but she was thought to be only 14, probably because of the fractured nature of her early childhood. Her actual birth date had been long forgotten and lost. So I will discuss Nellie's history based on all the records showing her to be 14 years old when she became pregnant with Walter. While she was pregnant with Walter, she was again taken into the custody of the Brooklyn Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children for the third time. She gave birth to Walter in April 1908 at Kings County Hospital in Brooklyn, while she was still in the custody of the Brooklyn Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. Walter's birth certificate lists his father's name as, wait for it, Warren Anger, her sister Katie's husband. Warren is listed on Walter's birth certificate as 27 years of age, twice Nellie's age. In May 1908, Nellie and her infant son, Walter, were transferred to the custody of the New York Foundling Hospital, a large Catholic orphanage in Midtown Manhattan. Nellie was assigned to work as a child's nurse to breastfeed Walter and at least one other child and care for some of the other infants in the custody of the New York Foundling Hospital. About a year and a half later, on January 1st, 1910, Nellie became pregnant for the second time, this time with my dad, Michael Nolan. Happy New Year! My dad was born September 30th, 1910, while Nellie was still in the custody of the New York Foundling Hospital because she was thought to be just 16 years old. So she continued living and working there as a child's nurse, caring for my infant father and the other infants in the nursery at the New York Foundling Hospital. Both my dad and his brother were given the surname Nolan because Nellie was unmarried when she gave birth to each of them. So I am one of the uncommon examples of a person whose surname was passed from a female ancestor. But who was my dad's father? My dad's birth certificate lists his father's name as unknown. So who is my paternal grandfather? Could Warren Anger also be my dad's father? I will discuss that in a moment. In April 1912, when Nellie was thought to be 18 years old, she was discharged from the New York Foundling Hospital and returned to living with her sister Katie in Brooklyn. Warren Anger had deserted Katie in March 1910, around the time it became evident that Nellie was again pregnant with my dad. Katie had remarried a man by the name of Thomas Kelleher. Nellie took a job working at a shoe manufacturing company in Brooklyn and probably sent money to the New York Foundling Hospital to help to support her two sons. Sometime, probably in the summer of 1915, Nellie met a man by the name of Enrique P., who had immigrated to Brooklyn from Havana, Cuba, in September 1914. Nellie and Enrique were married in November 1915. Nellie would have two more sons with her husband, Enrique. It is unknown if Enrique ever knew about Nellie having previously given birth to my Uncle Walter and my dad. By the laws of the time, when Enrique married Nellie, he should have become financially and legally responsible to raise my dad and his brother. On this basis, I believe Nellie never told Enrique about my dad and Walter. The New York founding records from my dad and uncle indicate that about the time of Nellie's marriage to Enrique, she relinquished her parental rights to Walter and my dad to the full custody of the New York Foundling Hospital. 1 year later, in November 1916, the New York Foundling Hospital sent my dad and his brother to Minnesota on one of the orphan trains of the era. If Nellie had not endured all the neglect and abuse of her childhood, my dad would not have been born, and I would not be here to tell you the story of her life. So, who was my paternal grandfather? There is substantial circumstantial evidence that Warren Anger, my Uncle Walter's father, could also be my dad's father. However, there is no definitive evidence to that effect. So the identity of my dad's father remained a family mystery for more than 100 years. In September 2021, 111 years after my dad's birth, the identity of his father was discovered through a combination of genetic genealogy, traditional genealogy, and geographic analysis. So 27 years after my dad's death in 1994, the mystery of the identity of my dad's father was solved. Turns out my dad's father was not Warren Anger, his brother Walter's father, but a teenage boy who lived across the street from the New York Foundling Hospital, where my grandmother Nellie was living and working as a child's nurse. His name is Vincent Markley. He is the youngest son of Edward and Julia Markley, my great-grandparents. Vincent was born in October 1892. So he was 17 years old when he impregnated my grandmother, Nellie Nolan, with my dad on that cold New Year's Day in 1910. At the time she became pregnant, Nellie was thought to be 15 years old. On my dad's birth certificate, Nellie is listed as 16 years old when he was born. My dad and his father continued to live across the street from each other for 6 years. Did they ever encounter each other during those years? Perhaps at Sunday Mass at St. Vincent Ferrer Church, the neighborhood parish? Did Vincent actually not know he had fathered a child with my grandmother? Or did he deny his role in the creation of my dad? Did Nellie purposefully not reveal the identity of my dad's father? Or did she perhaps not really know herself? Could she have shared her carnal charms with other boys? There are no details available about Nellie's sexual behavior. These are questions about my paternal grandfather and grandmother which can never be answered. If Nellie and Vincent had stayed together and married, he would have become legally and financially responsible for my dad's older brother, Walter. A huge disincentive for Vincent to acknowledge that he was a father of my dad. And if Nellie and Vincent had stayed together and raised my dad in New York City, my dad would never have met my mom, so neither I nor my family would be here today. In July 1917, 6 months after my 6-year-old dad and his 8-year-old brother Walter were sent to Minnesota on the orphan train, Vincent married Mabel Christie. Vincent and Mabel would have 4 children together. Ironically, in their adult years, Nellie and Vincent and their respective families lived just 3 miles from each other in the Jamaica Queens neighborhood of New York City. So, turning back to my maternal grandfather, Joseph Galassa. Joseph married my maternal grandmother, Anastasia Gamboris, in October 1914 in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. Like Joseph, Anastasia was Polish by heritage, but her nationality was Russian, as her home village of Pasieki was then part of the Russian Empire. She had immigrated to Winnipeg, Canada in June 1911 to live with her maternal aunt. Joseph and Anastasia's first child was born in Winnipeg in December 1915, but died in infancy on 13 March 1916. Joseph's 28th birthday. What a horrible birthday present. Joseph and Anastasia relocated to Minneapolis, Minnesota in January 1917 and proceeded to have 7 more children over the ensuing 8 years. In April 1925, 1 week after the birth of her 8th child, Anastasia died. My mom was 5 years old at the time of her mother's death. As my grandfather Joseph was more committed to the bottle than his family, he abandoned his 7 children to the care of St. Joseph's German Catholic Orphan Asylum in St. Paul, Minnesota. My mom's last recollection of her father was at the cemetery when her mother Anastasia was being buried. She and her siblings watched as her father turned and walked out of the cemetery as Anastasia's casket was being lowered into her grave. My mom never saw her father again. Joseph changed his name to hide his identity and lived for the following 28 years in the various skid row flop houses of Minneapolis and St. Paul, and was frequently arrested for public drunkenness. He remained completely estranged from his children during those 28 years. While my mom had lifelong bitterness about being abandoned by the death of her mother and disappearance of her father, I cannot imagine what her life would have been like had Joseph attempted to maintain custody or contact with his children. If Anastasia had not died and Joseph had not abandoned all his children, my mom's life would have been very different. She never would have met my dad, and I and my 4 daughters and 7 grandchildren would not be here today. And finally, my dad, the second-born bastard son of my grandmother, Nellie Nolan. My dad hated his foster father, Henry Baumgartner, in Minnesota. In the fall of 1931, when my dad had turned 21, he left his foster home, never to return. This was the midst of the Great Depression, which I think is a testament to his feelings about his foster father. To not return to the farm of his foster parents, where there was food and shelter available. Dad got himself caught up with a bad crowd and wound up stealing cars and cash. He was arrested, tried, convicted, and sentenced to prison. I have copies of all his arrest, court, and prison records, including newspaper articles. In May of 1942, Dad was released early from prison to join a war effort working at the Kaiser Industries shipyards in Richmond, California, building Liberty ships for the war effort. In October 1942, my mom relocated to Berkeley, California from Minnesota for better employment opportunities because of the war effort. My dad and mom met in November 1942 and married in September 1943 in Reno, Nevada. My mom and dad had never known each other in Minnesota. My sister was born August 1944, and I came along in November 1946. My dad kept the secret of his prison time for the rest of his life, never revealing anything to me or my sister. I wonder if he ever told my mom. I discovered his secret 15 years after his death, when I began researching our family's history. He must have learned his lesson, as he never had any further encounters with the legal system. So you could say that I am the bad seed from several generations of neglect, abandonment by my family line. 3 of my grandparents and 2 of my great-grandparents did not follow social norms or expectations about caring for and protecting their children. Only my maternal grandmother, Anastasia, and my mom played it straight. Anastasia died when she was only 36 years old, giving proof to the old adage, the good die young, particularly when compared to the lifespans of my other grandparents. My grandfather Joseph died at 65 years of age after living as a homeless alcoholic on the streets of Minneapolis and St. Paul for 28 years. My grandmother Nellie lived to be 80 years old. My grandfather Vincent lived to be 76 years old. My dad lived to be 83. And my mom lived to 80 years. So what does that say about me? Since I am, at the time of this writing, going on 79 years. But that is how I got here, so I could tell you this story about my origins as a direct result of all the socially unacceptable behavior of my three grandparents, my dad. With that in mind, I must celebrate all the misbehaving of my ancestors. Their socially inappropriate behavior are the very reason I, my 4 daughters, and 7 grandchildren are here today, and I am able to tell you their stories. If the chain of dark events that I have just described had not happened just as they did, I would not be here today. So, it ain't misbehaving, it's how I got here. I feel great gratitude to now know all the gritty details of my heritage, and am proud to be able to share these stories with my daughters and grandkids because it is their heritage too.